All right, Laura, you want to get us kicked off?
Okay, yes, thanks, Cece. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lori Schreier, and I'm a member of New Hampshire for Safe Technology. I've been active on EMF issues for several years after becoming aware of my own sensitivity and becoming aware of the science, which there seems to be more of every day, supporting the fact that there are harms from EMFs, especially in close proximity. New Hampshire for Safe Technology's mission is to educate New Hampshire residents and legislators and anyone else interested in learning about the risks of wireless technology and safer solutions, and to build support for passage of protective policy and legislation on all levels of government and in schools, workplaces, and healthcare settings. We support and advocate for the protective measures that were recommended and proposed by the New Hampshire Commission to study the health and environmental effects of emerging 5G technology. And that report was released in November of 2020. So I want to say thank you to the founders of New Hampshire for Safe Tech, Jen White and Deb Hodgson, who couldn't be here today, and who continue to facilitate the webinars that we're doing and the Facebook page and the email list where they send out information on emerging EMF science and actions every week, as well as Cece, who also does that. And she has graciously been doing these webinars for us for months from Massachusetts for Safe Technology, and she's here today. And I'll allow her to introduce herself in her fantastic presentation that she always does for us. So thank you, Cece.
Oh, thank you so much, Lori. And I'm so grateful to have you here with us. I know that you have a farm that you should be out there in the sunshine doing what you do for your organic farming. So I'm so very grateful that you have taken the time to be with us today. And I will go ahead and remove the spotlight from you and put it on my little Hollywood square here. And then if you would be so kind as to just keep an eye on the participants and go ahead and let people in when we see them coming on board. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. It's so nice to see new faces and some really wonderful, familiar faces. The information that we're going to share with you today, we'll send out slides so that anything that you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into, you'll be able to get through my slides. And so I'm going to start by going into a screen share, and it will just take a moment for that to load up. Sydney, can you give me a nod if you can see my screen? Perfect. Thank you so much. And welcome from California. It's always so nice to have you back here with us. Okay, so this is me. That little MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a bachelor's in communication from Northeastern University. And then I went on to earn my master's in technical and professional writing. And never in a million years did I imagine this is what I'd be using my skill set for, but I'm so grateful that I have it and I can use it to help inform and educate people on wireless risks and safer technology solutions. So I fell down the rabbit hole back in 2013 after I had spent 8 years running the local education foundation for my little town of Ashland, Massachusetts, when my kids were in school. And that was at the time. Hey, can I ask everybody who is with us today to please mute your audio? Some little things are coming in from the background. Thank you so much. So I used to run the local education foundation at the time when industry was telling us that our kids were going to need to have all this new technology to succeed in the world. So I ran campaign after campaign to get wireless infrastructure in our schools, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smartboards and minis, and what we thought were all these great new additions to the classroom. And then at book group one night, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer, she tipped us off that there could be biological effects to today's wireless technology. And that was news to me. So I just kind of made a mental note of it. But not long after that, somebody else sent me something, came across my desk that there looks to be biological effects from wireless technology. So that's when I started looking. And, you know, being a tech writer, I was just like, well, is there any science to this? So I just started poking around, and I was astounded to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing that this technology is extraordinarily harmful. And we'll walk you through the science on this in just a few minutes. So as I started reading all of this, I'm going, oh my gosh, we need to take care of this. And I thought that if I raised my hands with our schools, that it would be like a gas leak in the chemistry lab or something. And we would, of course, get the kids out of the building and make it safe and then bring them back in. But I got crickets. Nobody even responded to me at first. And I'm feeling like I'm in the twilight zone at this point, right? I'm like, the science is showing kids are especially vulnerable. But what I later learned is that the wireless industry had already gotten in at the state level and had put it in through our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that all this technology had to be embedded in the curriculum. So it became a very difficult conversation to have. But when they read the legal fine print, I think that's where they had an uh-oh moment. And that's how we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms with precautionary words like, turn off the devices when we're not using them. Otherwise, they're pulsing radiation all the time. Turn the Wi-Fi on only on an as-needed basis, and always place the device away from the body. So we'll show you that legal fine print in a minute that tells us all of that. So that's how I began on my journey. And when I realized that our schools put up this sign, probably to protect their legal backside, I kept thinking, this isn't good enough because they're not actually doing it. They're not actually turning off the wireless and protecting the kids. So that's when I went to my state senator and I spoke to my state representative as well. And Senator Karen Spilka put me in with a lawyer in her office because I measured her cell phone. I measured her district director's laptop, and both their devices went way into the red zone of danger. So we started doing legislation in Massachusetts. I met with Senator Spilka in 2014. She introduced a bill in 2015. We've had more than 20 bills in Massachusetts, and we've made some important progress, but we've never passed a bill to actually tell the public what the risks are and how to use this technology safely. We are so blessed that we have made those types of inroads in New Hampshire. And it's still an uphill battle in New Hampshire, but we'll show you some really good things that have happened. And then I was contacted by a couple in the United Kingdom, Brett West and his wife. Brett was a technologist. He had formerly been an emergency medical technician in South Africa when he was a young man. And now he worked in high tech, and his job was to put wireless systems in massive construction projects in the UK. Brett had learned that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, which are the doctors that get the conundrum cases that their medical school training never trained them for, they put out a position statement back in 2012 to school superintendents saying, we should be hardwiring our schools and not radiating the children and the staff. So Brett and his wife, Lynn, and one of the scientists in Finland, Dr. Mikko Ahonen, and we spent this amazing period of time together, and we created online training where we can literally train a workforce, a school force, parents, mature students in about a half an hour online. So if you want a good crash course, you might go check out wireless education. We do charge a small fee to help us with our overhead costs, but it's literally about the cost of a movie ticket. It's like $15. So know that these resources are there. And then Dr. Deborah Davis, who's the founder of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's greatest database on this topic. She was the one who introduced me to Brett and Lynn West in the UK and introduced Miko Ahonen, the scientist, to us. She brought a team of experts to the Massachusetts State House back in 2015 or 2016. And that was the first time I got to meet others who were talking about this issue, because for the first 2 years, I was completely self-taught, and the science was so compelling, even a decade ago, that having brought this into my schools, I couldn't let it go. So I went to the State House, and Dr. Deborah Davis, she's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She brought with her Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He is now speaking out on this issue. And she brought Dr. Sharma from India, who in the Indian government is one of the ones who determines how much public radiation exposure there can be. And he has taken where our FCC, Federal Communications limits, are, India's were right up there next to it. He has reduced them 90%. At least on paper in India. They're still in the throes of figuring out how to actually protect the public. But at least it showed that with some political will, we can make important inroads. So we had other experts on that panel. And as I realized there were other people all around Massachusetts who knew about this and were working on it in their communities, we eventually formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which I think over time spurred New Hampshire for Safe Technology. Now there are more than 150 groups all across the country that are working on this issue. And that's a big piece of disinformation that the industry will give to our communities when they come in with a dangerously close cell tower or small cell or smart meters and say, oh, you know, nobody else cares about this. This is just the NIMBYs, not in my backyard people who are talking about, you know, they don't want this. It's simply not true. If you go out to Americans for Responsible Technology, and I have a link to them later on, they show more than 150 groups all over the country who are working hard on this. There are people in Canada working on this. There are people in Europe and all over the world, because we know our children and our pollinators and ourselves are getting sicker and sicker with each new iteration of wireless technology that's introduced into our world here today. So for the last few years, we've been meeting once a month. We meet every Wednesday, the third Wednesday, I should say, of every month at 12 noon Eastern. And that's more of our strategy planning meeting. What are you guys doing in your community? What's working? What's not working? What's coming around the bend? How do we get ahead of it? So anybody is welcome to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. On our events page, you'll see our monthly strategy call, and you'll also see that every month we offer 2 of these free public education webinars, so that as you digest this information and go a little deeper, you can come back and keep learning with us. And you can also bring your loved ones, your town public servants, your school public servants, or private school administrators. And your legislators, because this is a safe, credible, non-threatening place to be introduced to the facts. And that's why we do this. We do this for you, so there's always a current place to come to learn. I like to share this link for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference that was held down at the National Institutes of Health. I was so honored when they asked me to co-chair the technology panel. And I was able to bring in Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada, Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist in this area. He was also a fighter pilot and an engineer in Silicon Valley, where it was like his friends who invented the cell phone and stuff. So I was really taken with the lecture I saw Peter give to the autism community. And Peter had gotten really sick, very likely due to the high levels of radio frequency radiation on his fighter plane, as well as all the instrumentation within the plane, and then being up there with the Earth's really high electromagnetic field. So Peter's health really started crashing. And then he had two sons, and as each of them came in through the preschool years, they were both diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And I had never heard anybody say that in certain cases, you don't have to have a life sentence for autism. Apparently, there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come through mom's genes, it didn't come through dad's bloodline.
HR, please.
Can I please ask everybody to mute? And so when Peter's sons were in their preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And he did what a lot of parents will do, which is shift from conventionally grown foods with chemicals to a pure, clean, organic diet. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox to get all that out of the system, because that can cause conflicts with other environmental stressors like radio frequency radiation. Today, he says his first piece of advice is to do a digital detox and give the house at least 12 hours a night where the radio frequency radiation is not transmitting. That's a first step, is to create that sleep sanctuary. And Peter will tell you today that both of his sons are now young men. They went through college. They are doing great, and neither one of them is on the autism spectrum again or any longer. So we don't want to overpromise by any means. Every single body is very different individually, but by removing these man-made exposures, there are a lot of gains that many people have every single day, simply by getting these exposures out of the environment. One of the biggest gaps that we had when I was first studying this is that a lot of people were getting sick and their doctors had no idea to advise them to remove the radio frequency exposures. Now we are so fortunate that we have an EMF medical conference, and I'll just spend a second to talk about alphabet soup and the acronyms that we swim around in this work. Lori, would you be able to go into the participants and mute whoever that is? Thank you. So EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the pulsations of microwaves that are pulsed out of all of our wireless technology. There are other types of man-made electromagnetic fields that come off of the wiring behind the walls of our homes. In commercial builds, they have to use a shielded wire, which simply means it's got a foil liner in there. But in residential, they haven't made that part of the building code yet. So there are other man-made forms of electromagnetic fields, but the ones that we're going to focus on today are radio frequency radiation fields. These are two-way microwave radiation pulses that come from our own personal devices, as well as what they're connecting to in the forms of routers, cell towers, utility smart meters, the new 5G small cell antennas, and perhaps the satellites that are being launched by the thousands overhead. So we have this medical conference. It began in 2021. It was recertified until June 15th of this year. So if anybody wants to just go learn, anybody can take this conference. You don't have to be a licensed healthcare practitioner. We have dropped the pricing down so low, it's less than $50 to attend this 3 or 4 day medical conference, and it's all done on Zoom or on a virtual platform. So there's a 4-hour pre-conference course that Dr. Magda Havas, Professor Emeritus from Trent University, who taught electromagnetism for 25 years. She is one of the conference co-chairs, and she does a 4-credit pre-conference course to give everybody the basics, and a credit equals an hour. So it's a 4-hour course. Give everybody the basics of what these man-made energies are and the risks, and starting with solutions for what we can do. And then we have world-leading doctors and scientists. I was honored to be asked to speak on state and local policy. But it's a really great way to learn. And in all total, there's 24.5 continuing medical education credits. But those who want to attend, and especially those who want to get the credits, you have to be enrolled by June 15th and complete the training by July 1st. So later in my slides, you'll see I've got a link to a letter that you can print off and take with you to all of your doctor's appointments, your dentist appointments, your therapists, your physical therapists, whoever you see for healthcare. Please hand them the letter, because most of them are completely in the dark and they have no idea that this radio frequency wireless radiation is causing so much harm today. So we have so many amazing resources that we didn't even have a decade ago. And I'm excited to share all that with you today. So how did my schools become the first in the nation? As I mentioned, I think it started when they read that legal fine print, and our friends at Environmental Health Trust has a page on the fine print. But for anybody with us today that has an iPhone, I invite you to take that out and go into your settings. So once you're in settings, a little ways down, hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but most people have been talked into upgrading their devices. From general or about, you go all the way down to the bottom where you see legal and regulatory. Hit that. And then a little ways down, maybe 4 down on the next list, you'll see RF exposure. This is the legal fine print on radio frequency microwave radiation. It's two-way microwave radiation that they politely call energy. And it is, it's a man-made light energy form. But they tell us a couple of really important things in there. They say, one, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking this into your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket or your yoga pants or your back pocket, you're exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's public radiation exposure limits that were set back in 1996, before we had any of this technology that we depend on today. A little further down, it says, so if you want to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. And they suggest using a headset or a speakerphone. And I will come out of the slide sharing for just a second there. And I want to show you another alternative, because folks, we have solutions for everything. But it does, let's take a little relearning and a shift in our mindset. But this is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. Notice there's no metal that would be going up to my brain. A little ways down are these little beads. These are called ferrite beads, and they break the radiation that's traveling up the metal wire here. And this, you know, you would plug it into your device like you'd do anything, and then set the radiating device as far away from you as you can, and then use the hollow tube headset or the air tube headset. And we don't want to, you know, fool ourselves. There is no safe level of microwave man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So we want to get to as low as reasonably achievable. That's called the ALARA principle. And the Centers for Disease Control already uses the ALARA principle to get to as low as reasonably achievable with ionizing radiation. So our man-made microwave radiation is something called non-ionizing radiation, meaning it doesn't have enough power behind it to break the atom apart. But that's where the FCC's limits are now. They're set for these heat limits or thermal limits that you'd have to have so much heat to break the atom apart. But what the science that we'll look at in a few minutes is telling us is that the radiation levels from all of our man-made stuff is happening at hundreds of thousands of times below that. So the FCC still allows this much, and the industry is still putting it out at this high. But the science is showing great harm at hundreds of thousands of times below that. So in that legal fine print that's been there all along, they're telling us, keep these things away from you and your loved ones and our pollinators and everything else. So that fine print has been in there covering their legal backside forever. And that is one of the most efficient ways I found to introduce others into this conversation, because as soon as you start suggesting to people that their devices are harmful, they're not going to want to hear it, because we've all become talked into using them as the center of our lives. And they'll be thinking, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. But if you can show them the fine print that's in their own devices, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and they go, whoa, I never knew that was there. The second way that I found to be most effective to engage people in this conversation is to show them the radiation that's transmitting from their devices. And I learned that there are radio frequency, broadband, meters out there on the market. And so I went after a grant, and it wasn't easy. Again, I had to really educate folks, and I had to go through 3 different grant cycles before our select board here in Massachusetts in Ashland granted me conditionally the funding to put one of these meters on loan. So back in 2016, I had to go individually meet with every single one of our select board members and really educate them on this. And then they voted to allow 1 meter for our library. I wanted 2. I wanted to give 1 to the school so they could measure and protect the kids. But they said, well, this is all really new for us, but if the library agrees to take it into circulation, then they would go ahead and grant me $400 to get this meter. So I went before the board of trustees at the library, and there were 5 of them. And one gentleman sat there like this, and you could tell he did not want to hear anything about wireless being harmful. Another one couldn't wait to get her hands on that meter to take it home and see what was happening in her house. And then a third one said, look, regardless of how we feel personally, we are a conduit of information for our communities. So I think it's really important that we do go ahead and we do let this piece of equipment come into circulation. And then they voted 4-1. They agreed to put this meter on loan in the library. And, I'm not so smart, but I can certainly copy people. And one of the things I copied here is that when the energy industry was taking away our safer incandescent light bulbs and replacing them with those swirly CFL light bulbs, which throw off, by the way, another form of really dirty electricity that is biologically not compatible with our biological cells. When they were pushing those out into the market, one of their marketing campaigns was to donate to our libraries a kilowatt meter that came in this nice case that they barcoded, thinking that you could take it home and measure how much energy your incandescent light bulbs use, and then measure one of these new CFL light bulbs and see how much money you're going to save over the course of a year. So that's how I even got the idea for this. So we became the first in the United States to put this one, at the time was the Acoustimeter. It's on par with this other one, which is a Safe and Sound Pro 2. And the Safe and Sound Pro 2 is what's been recommended at the EMF Medical Conference. And doctors are bringing this into their practice, loaning it to their patients and saying, go home and measure, and then come back and we'll teach you how to remediate. So most libraries today now have a library of things. So it was a stretch back in 2016, but now most libraries are loaning out stuff. So it's not hard to ask your library to put one on loan. A doctor and I went after one for the Newton, Massachusetts Public Library. And then out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, their library funded it outright. So a lot of libraries now have budget for things. So think of that as an opportunity in your community to maybe put one on loan. I know Lori, our co-host today, went in with a neighbor and they split the cost on it and then they share the meter. But it is critically important to be able to measure the radiation exposures, because with 5G and the Internet of Things, that's how they're connecting everything, is through these radio frequency microwave radiation antennas. So every product they sell you these days, they want to be able to connect it to the internet harvest your data, sell that data for profit, and put people in your direction who want to sell you things that they think you'd be interested in. So being able to measure this is really important. So I'm going to stop